Hello and welcome to the Seton Education Podcast, where we delve into all things home education with expert guests from around the world. I'm Victoria. Today I'm speaking to Andrea Hebert, a homeschooling mother of four in British Columbia. She's generously offered to share her experience of home education with us. Hi Andrea, thank you so much for joining me.
It is a real pleasure to be here, Victoria. Thank you for asking me.
So can you just start by expanding a bit on, where you live, how many children you have, and how long you've been home educating?
Sure. So we live in beautiful British Columbia in Canada, and we live in the metropolitan Vancouver area, so just outside of Vancouver. And I have four children. My oldest is 18 years old, a daughter. I have another daughter who's 15, and I have twins that are 13. So we're getting towards the end and closer to the end, not as close to the beginning of our homeschooling journey. So I've been doing homeschooling, home education for 13 years.
My goodness. So right from the start with all of them?
Right from the start, yes. So Kate started in kindergarten, with me.
Interesting. And so what did you do professionally before you began home educating, or what was your educational background yourself?
Yeah. So I did an undergraduate degree in English literature. I love English literature. And I also have a teaching certificate. So I did my bachelor's of education. I've been a teacher. I was teaching for 6 years before we had any children. And I really enjoyed school. As a matter of fact, when I trained, I was training for public education. And this is part of a little bit of our homeschooling journey, actually. I started out fully believing that I went to public school and fully believed I would teach in public school. And my first job, I ended up getting a private school placement and loved it. And so then I thought, private school education is great. I taught at a Christian school for 6 years. And it was a wonderful experience. And believed that could be even where our kids would go. But that isn't how it ended up.
Okay, so tell me, what's the next step? How did you go from being a passionate teacher to leaving that system?
Well, it was interesting. My husband got elected as a member of parliament here in British Columbia to represent our area in Ottawa, in Canada. And this was before we had any children. And I was teaching full time and enjoying my job as a teacher. He had this opportunity at one point. I had friends who were leaving teaching because they were having children. And one of them in particular started homeschooling her kid. And I thought, this is really interesting. Like, I'm just watching her get this journey started. And I thought that was really fascinating. It kind of piqued my interest. And then as a member of parliament, Russ was asked to bring greetings from the government for the opening ceremonies of a homeschool conference happening in our area, a home education conference. And that was lovely. I went with him, but we stayed to listen to the speakers. And the keynote speaker in particular that we enjoyed was Gordon Neufeld, who's a really well-known psychologist. And he was speaking about a lot of the issues that kids are facing in school. His book, Hold On to Your Kids, is all about bullying, things that are happening in school. And I know I had seen some of the issues that were going on in schools. And he talked about how, as home educators, the parents that were there had their finger on the issue and they understood that they wanted to be the primary influence in their kids' lives. And that was really the gist of his book. And so he was speaking about keeping you being the primary person to orient your children's affections and where their interests would lie, that you would be that primary influence and no one else, and that was a healthy thing for your children. It totally made sense to us. That was a really huge instigation for us to think about what we were going to do when our kids came. And when we did have children, a couple of years later, then we started to think about how are we going to do school while we're living on one end of the country and Russ having to commute to the other end of the country or to the more central part of Canada in order to serve as a public servant. And we knew that would require quite a bit of time apart. And that was not interesting to us as a family. We wanted to stay together. And so very practically, we decided that home education could really work for our family, as well as, understanding the upsides to being close together as a family through it all. So that the start of our journey really started before we had kids, but when they came along and we understood how much we wanted to be together as a family, it really just made sense.
And for people who don't know, so Gordon Neufeld, so he's a proponent of attachment theory and how this importance of families being together and how that is so central to all of the things that children go on to, develop, and, academically and socially and all those other things. So it sounds like it almost came from a theoretical place, and then you had these children and you thought, yeah, this fits. I now know what he's talking about. I can appreciate that feeling completely.
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's the theoretical, there's also the having the lived experience of being in a classroom and understanding how the classroom works, which in like good schools, it does work well, but it's never what you can do when you are educating at home. It's never the same.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And because I think a lot of people, a lot of teachers end up home educating their children. And I think that some people who then home educate or are thinking about home educating say, well, I couldn't do it because I'm not a teacher. Whereas other teachers I've spoken to have said, oh, actually, it was because I was a teacher, I saw things that made me want to home educate rather than it was the other way around. So what advice would you have for people who say, well, I'm not a teacher? Is that a barrier to home education?
So I actually do hear that quite a bit. I actually, many people will say, oh, well, you were a teacher, so that totally makes sense why you would want to do this. You're probably really good at it. And I have often said, it's actually not about the teaching skills as a parent. It's actually about your desire to do what's best for your kid. And everybody has that. And anybody can do that if they're really, really determined. So I think that being a teacher has some upsides maybe to organizing or thinking about school, but it also has some downsides in organizing and thinking about school. So sometimes when people have not been a teacher, they organize school in a way that I think is unique and really well suited to their children. And I really believe that you do not have to be a teacher to be an excellent home educator. You just have to be a parent who really loves your children and is dedicated to doing what is best for them.
What would you say are the sort of most important skills? You've mentioned organization there, maybe, and also a desire to do what's really best for your child. What do you think are the kind of most important things that are kind of prerequisites if you're thinking about home educating a child?
Well, you just have to be committed, I think, to being a student of your children. You need to really understand them well and what they need. And at the same time, I think understanding your family's values, what's important to you as a family, and understanding your skills, where you have gaps and where you are already very skilled, you're going to naturally go towards where you're very skilled. And then being able to find other ways to fill up any gaps that you might have in your ability to teach or what you really want to teach your kid. But I think it's just really important to understand what it is that's important to your family. And for us, it was really important that we teach our kids what is good, what is true, and what is beautiful. And once you have sort of a set idea of where you want to go, it's easy to find almost anything in order to teach. So I think, again, if you're a good student of your children, if you understand their needs and you can work with those and find ways of meeting those needs, the rest is really just your goals and your hopes and your dreams for where you want your education to go, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. And of course, you will, like we all do, come into contact with lots of people who don't home educate their children, particularly when you've come from a background of being a teacher. Bearing in mind that idea that you've just said, if you want to do, the best for your children, that's so important when you decide to home educate. sometimes it can be difficult, I think, for particularly new home educators to talk to parents who aren't home educating or who've never even thought about it without sounding judgmental or like they're criticizing someone else's way of doing things. How do you practically, as a mum and as a family, how do you navigate those kind of conversations with people who aren't home educators?
So we obviously, I feel like I'm very fortunate because I am in a community where there's quite a few home educating people. So it's not totally unusual here, but I do have lots of neighbors who don't. And it's really interesting because our conversations are often actually them admiring that we are doing it. And many times they're saying they wish they could as well. They feel for whatever reason that they can't. And I've often encouraged them that many of them actually do after school homeschool, really, because they feel that there are gaps in their child's education. But I am always very careful to say that you have to do what's best for your family. And this is what really works well for our family. This works well with our circumstances. It worked well then, it works well now, and that's why we continue. And I try to emphasize that parents can do, like, they can do what's best for their kids, and it can look different for every family. So I try never to sound like judgmental about other people's choices. Many parents are doing amazing things in their after school hours to help their kids be well educated. And so I have to admire them too. So.
I think that's a really good point. I think it's a bit like, I don't want to say there are compromises involved with home educating, but insofar as there are compromises involved with everything in life. And I think it's a kind of pie chart of what is important, what is the most important to your family, what is slightly less important. Where are you willing to say, well, you know, in your case, with your husband being in Ottawa, you being in Vancouver when you started, if you want to be together, logistics suddenly becomes a really big part of your decision in how you're going to educate your children. Maybe if that isn't a trigger for other people, I think at any point it's weighing up those different parts. And you know, when you come to home education, you've weighed those up, that pie chart looks that way, that it leads to a certain answer for you. And maybe for other people, one of those parts of the pie chart isn't at that time particularly prevalent, or you know, I think about it like that. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And I think in some situations for some parents, they actually will come to the conclusion, I am not spending enough time with my kids. And I am seeing that becoming a real issue with our relationship, and they will. And that's one of the things that Gordon Neufeld actually talks about in his book. They will bring them home. They will decide, like, this is maybe a really good time for us to take a year off school and spend more time together. And I can cover some things for a year or two with my kids. And then sometimes it ends up being longer. And I've seen that happen as well, where people have just taken them out just to be reconnected with their kids. That's one major upside to home education, is the time that you spend together. For some people, they might feel like that's a downside, but I actually love being with my kids, and we love being together as a family. So if there is strain, if anyone feels like they're really missing out on a part of their kids' lives and they're not making that connection that they would like, this is a really great option for reconnecting with kids, even teens who they feel are going off the rails or having real difficult times. I've seen many parents come their kids' junior high years. They bring them home and they spend more time with them, and they help them to detox from whatever situation they came from. And sometimes they go back for high school. They don't have to, but sometimes they do. And it's really lovely seeing how some parents make that choice because they just see that their kids need it.
Like anything in life, the more you do, the better you become. And so actually, I've seen people who say, oh, I could never spend that time with my children. You know, we row too much, or she'd never listen to me, or all those things. But actually, like with anything, you know, when you first ride a bike, it's really, really hard. But
Yeah.
when you've been riding a bike for 5 years, it's super easy. It's super natural. You enjoy it. You don't even think about riding the bike anymore. You're just enjoying the landscape. And I think any skill is a new skill. And actually, I often see that when people lean into spending much more time with their children, they often then say, well, what was I worried about? Now we get on really well. I understand her. Like you said, you become a student of your children. So you learn what's making them tick. You understand them better. It's like learning a new language, spending time with someone, like any relationship, right?
It's so true. Yeah. And I always find, actually, when I find their tension growing, it makes me stop and pause and think, like, what am I missing? And where have I maybe not paid attention to something that I need to? And, maybe it's time to just sit down and go for a coffee, or, have an ice cream together and just ask, like, what's going on? What do we need to do differently? And some families are so busy and so time crunched, running from school to other activities to everything else that's going on in their lives, they don't have time to even notice. And suddenly their kids are grown and they haven't got that relationship with them. Or I feel like we have that relationship, and I can notice, and I can take the time to talk to them and find out what's going on. And I just think that that's really important. We have them for such a short time, and they are our greatest investment. And I just think that there's just so much value to that.
I think you're so right to pick that up. Time is such a huge benefit of home education. I feel like life gets busier and busier, and in this frenetic running around, and I understand why, but homework and after school clubs, and through parents wanting to do the best for their children, they end up so time poor that they actually lose sight almost of what's good for their children, because they're just so desperate to fit everything in, and everyone ends up losing and feeling miserable and like they're not doing their best.
Exactly.
And I'm sure you saw that in school as well. I went to school too, and I enjoyed school, but looking back, I think my teenage years were hectic. I'd get up, I'd do swim training, then I'd get to school, then I'd do a full day of school, then I did drama or whatever the other thing was, then I'd go home and work sometimes till 11 p.m. And I think, goodness, it was frenetic.
Yeah. And it was all good things. But in the end, really, like, it's your relationship that is the most important. And that's the one thing beyond the teaching years that you will have with them. They can go and get all kinds of other skills, but the time with you and what they can learn from you and being with you is really, like, not really something you can get back.
Often, as you all know, people level at homeschoolers, what about socialization? And what you've just said is that actually what children can learn from close relationships is almost the most important thing from their childhood years, rather than the things on the transcript. In that scenario, then you shouldn't worry about socialization or any other social or psychological or behavioral issue, because they're just getting that much more time with a close adult who's modeling good behavior.
Exactly. And I didn't mean to bring it back to Gordon Neufeld every time, but that's exactly what his book says, right? And when people ask about socialization, I often say, I think what you're really referring to is socializing, which is a very different thing. Socialization begins at home, and it is really what we teach our kids about how to get along in society and how to treat other people. And there is really no one better than me and my husband to teach our children how to get along and how to treat other people. And so I think that this is the best way to have them be socialized.
I think character education is often separated for good reason in the school system, and the schools think that's the parents' responsibility, and the schools think, well, we'll take part of the education. But then you have this disconnect where children are growing up, often they don't have time with their parents to work on that character education. The school don't think it's their responsibility, and actually when we talk about preparing children for the real world, that's a massive part of your personality that is missing if you haven't had those years to work on what developing your own personality, basically, and your own identity.
Totally. And that was actually one area of learning in my education degree that I was really surprised at, is how much time they talked about, it really is up to us as teachers to inculcate values in the kids, because really parents are busy and they don't really have time. And so we have to find the agreed upon values, and we need to teach that to the kids, because they're coming from busy families. And I remember thinking, actually, I don't really feel like that's my job as a teacher. I feel like that's what parents ought to be doing. But I feel like in education degrees, they are trying to tell teachers that that's more and more their responsibility, that they're taking on a lot of the roles of parents in order to fill in gaps where they see that, there are busy families and we're spending more time with children all the time. They're adding hours all the time to the school day and daycare time. So, this is what we need to do. We need to step up. And I've always felt like, no, that's the job of the parent. And that was the reason I had children. I wanted to extend, our ideas and our values as a family off into the future. And they're our greatest investment. And that is what I take seriously.
I think actually values are, I would say, almost impossible to teach off a curriculum in a four walls of a classroom setting.
Absolutely. Just a bunch of posters on a wall and a few, words, but really it is very hard to teach.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can totally understand why teachers would feel
because it's lived,
short.
Right? It's lived.
Yeah, it's lived. It's lived experience. And and again, it comes back to time. You need the time to have those lived experiences and those shared experiences, which I think is kind of what you're saying there. So we've talked a lot about your mission and your idea and your sort of values, and how that shaped your decision to home educate. If we just step into the practical, which I think will be really interesting for people who are considering it or just starting out, what does a week look like? What approach do you use as a family? Do you have one curriculum you follow? Do you choose different curricula? How does that work for you?
Okay, so first of all, it does change over the years. It's never the same. And it's very different from dealing with younger children to when you get to the older children. So it's going to shift and it's going to change over time. I've never had any one curriculum that I've used. I have probably tried almost everything that there is out there, and I've enjoyed using different things for teaching all the time. And I see them as tools. I don't see them as, they don't box me in. I use them as I see fit, if that makes sense. So I use them, they don't use me, is sort of how you have to approach it as a tool. And so I think I've always had the approach that there are sort of, I've always had a literature-based approach. I've always loved using books to teach. And I still try to do that even in the older years. So that's something actually that can carry over. And I use, I sort of think of topics as majors and minors. Like the majors are things like English and social studies, and they can become quite a spine for teaching all kinds of things. When your children are younger, you can use a really good book. And I have used some really great curricula that had a series of books that you could read from, and then from that pull out language art, math, science, social studies, art, everything from one good book. And you could do that for, a month, depending how young the kids are and how long the book is. So a literature-based approach is really actually very, very good. We also have quite a classical bent. So we do love the classical model of learning. And we just think that the great books have a lot to teach us from the past and into the future. So we've tried to use great books as well in a lot of our learning. We have also, because we've had years where we did, let's say, quite a lot of traveling, sometimes we just had to take things with us, and we would call that road schooling. So making sure that what we were using, and including a good book or two, was just portable, and we could take it with us, and we, would travel for, let's say, a month or 6 weeks or something like that on the road in an RV. So there's like really unique things that you can do that are really fun, and that can just fit what your family is able to do at the time. One thing I did when my kids were young that I think is very helpful is see some of the topics that you're learning as daily activities and see others as a kind of a loop activity. So I had like a list of things that I wanted to do with my kids. That might be like poetry reading from like a kid's Shakespeare book, learning Latin or Latin roots or Greek roots. But we wouldn't necessarily do it every day. We would have a daily time where all together we would sit down, and I would do, let's say, 2 or 3 of those things together as a group. And then, but my list would be much longer, let's say 5 or 6 things. I'd do 2 or 3 of them as much time as we had attention for. And then we would break off because I had different ages to teach different things. Then we would go off and do, let's say, math. And everybody would do their, different math things. And then the next day we would have, it's a Cindy Rollins, I think is the name of the person. It's called Morning Time, where you would have a basket of things with you in the morning, and you would just rotate through these things in a loop fashion. So I'll just do 2 or 3 of them this morning, and then we'll go off and do other school. And then the next morning, do the next 2 or 3 things on the list and go off and do school. There were the things that we would do daily. And I often try to do the more, I would say, more academic things in the morning, just because those are when our brains were fresher. We're able to take more things in, and do lighter things in the afternoon when everybody is a little more tired or needed sort of light playtime. And because art can be really playful and running around or exploring outside or doing just other things that were more active in the afternoon. You take a break from the brain thing. So I tend to be quite structured in my style and my approach. I just found it easier to stay on task and not just let the day get away from you. So that was my approach, especially with the younger ones, was the morning basket, looping through a few activities that we could all do together, and then going off to do some academic work individually with my kids, and then spending the afternoons doing lighter activities or pursuing personal interests and projects, things like that. So
I think that's something that sometimes surprises people who've come through a traditional school setting. Just give us an idea of the time spent on at different ages, obviously, but sort of heavy academics.
Yeah, so that I would say, again, depending on the child and the needs and the number of kids that you're working with, I think most kids can probably spend like 3 or 4 hours a day, and then it can be quite light after that. So, but again, it doesn't have to even be like 3 solid hours. It's half an hour, 45 minutes. Take a break. Half an hour, 45 minutes. Let's do something. Let's go jump on the trampoline or have a snack or whatever. And so it's never like sit at a desk, have to sit down, 3 or 4 hours of solid time. I give my kids quite a lot of freedom to work through what they need to do. They know what they need to do. That's how we talk about it. You know what you need to do. And I'm always there to help them. Now my kids are older at this point, so now it's much more me being a guide and less me being the direct teacher. And we do reading together as a family still, and I still have a book as a spine, usually for social studies and language art, and sometimes science topics as well, because there's some really great books out there. But they they know what they need to work through every day in terms of math and other activities that they need to do every day, and other things that we do. Actually, even our science curriculum, I think, is quite, I can spend time together as a group, we work on science things as well. So we can do a lot of things together. And then because they're at different ages and different stages in terms of what their abilities are for other academic topics, then they do those individually. And I'm there to guide them through, if that makes sense.
So you've talked about your role, which is super helpful to understand. In the 21st century, often I think it's difficult for women who are home-based, and particularly when you're spending a lot of time with your children, to react or know how to react to comments like, what a waste of an education, or why aren't you pursuing a career, or sometimes, oh, is your husband making you do this? How do you respond to those how do you see yourself as a 21st century woman, and how that fits with gender roles, and how you see yourself, I suppose, being so home-based?
So again, I'm really fortunate that we have very supportive family and very supportive friends, many people around us who are homeschoolers and home educators who actually are like quite on board with what we're doing. Obviously, our neighbors who see the benefits, and but I do understand that sometimes there's criticism, and I think that we are very fortunate as women living in this time where it's very clear that we are able to choose and to be free to choose how to live our lives. And when we choose to stay home with our kids, it should be respected, just as any woman who chooses to do any other career might be respected for that choice. So I feel like I know that there is criticism, and that people could be critical of that, but it should not be. And I think that we need to ask for that respect for our choices. It is a career choice. It is an advancement maybe towards more money or up a corporate ladder, but it is an important career choice. I think that what we are creating are really amazing human beings that are going to continue to contribute like we do to our communities and our countries in really amazing ways. And school, the time that we spend educating our children is actually very short, and we have a lot of time after they're gone to pursue other things as well. And there is this really wonderful time that we have to invest in people that are going to do great things in our country and in our place, in our communities. And I see that as a very valuable and respectable contribution that we're making. And then I can do other things to contribute later. So I see it as a very short, a short and different investment in our country. And I already see it. I have an 18-year-old who I'm going to do amazing things, and she's already off to a great start in her education, her post-secondary education. And I can see my educating years coming to an end, and I see many years ahead of me to do other things. So I try to tell people that. I try to remind people that this is just a short time that I have with my kids. So.
No, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for taking some of that time to speak to me today. And it's really generous of you to share your experience with us all. So thank you, Andrea.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
And thank you so much for joining the Seton Education Podcast. Whether you watched us on YouTube or you listened as a podcast, please like, comment and follow as we discuss how home education can be an achievable alternative to conventional schooling.